Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 95 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
It's been kind of a bad sleep week for me. I don't know what it. Guess I'm just getting old.
It's the getting old thing.
It's the weather. It's the getting old. It's
weather here in eastern Michigan went from single-digit temps. That's Fahrenheit, so that'd be well into the negative teens Celsius.
Yes.
To what it hit 50 today.
Yeah.
I think, which is a little colder than room temperature. I don't know what that actually converts to in Celsius, but
yeah.
But it almost spring-like weather.
Almost.
Spring-like
we lost
weather,
a lot of the snow, but at the same time, it meant a lot of humidity, a lot of things like decomposing, which always messes with the sinuses. I mean, it's just
the pressure change and all that. My joints were just aching.
Yeah, that's basically where I was last night. I did not sleep well because of my joints.
Yeah.
I now know what it's like to live in full plate armor through feeling. I've had that discussion with people who have fallen asleep in full plate at like Penzic for the SCA.
Yeah.
And waking up and basically like, you are now 1, A, with your armor, and B, all of your joints hurt. Because everything's weighted. Everything, you're just heavier.
I can imagine.
And it's not something your body is ready for.
Nope.
So...
Nope.
And
because of the warmer temperatures, my cat came to bed for the first time in a while. She abandoned the heated bed that you bought her, so that's why I never see her anymore.
Well, I'm a good uncle? Question mark.
And she finally slept down at my feet, which I'd kind of started getting used to not having the cat encumbering my sleep, and then all of a sudden she was just tangled up in my legs all night. So I couldn't. Yeah.
At the same time, sweetness.
Yep. At the same time, sweetness.
So, speaking of little things.
Yeah. all the little things.
All the small things.
And that's what we're here to talk about tonight.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of little fiddly micromanagement in pretty much most games.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the lighter stuff,
rules
like
lighter, yeah.
Rules lighter stuff. I think like Powered by the Apocalypse. Even like Savage Worlds and stuff that doesn't really have.
Well, Savage World doesn't have it.
A lot of the fiddly little ammo counts and
Mouse Guard doesn't have that.
Yeah.
I mean, it has other things that are small, but not it's not the true little bits.
Right. But there's always kind of that looming question when you're running a game is it's all right there in the rules, but how much do you really pay attention to it? And if you do, how much does it bog down gameplay? Does it bog down gameplay in a way that is worth the trade-off in that it adds to the storytelling?
Mm-hmm. Also, like, who enjoys that?
Yeah.
Like, where is enjoyment, and do some people just miss it?
Or are the big question, are things like encumbrance and strict ammo counts and strict keeping track of your spell components and your rations and all that jazz, is that just passé? Is that just part of a bygone era that has no place in tabletop anymore? In the current era of RP.
Yeah.
But we're here to basically talk about all that tonight.
Yeah. And the more we looked at this discussion, I think the more we recognized that there isn't a lot of minutia to talk about in it, but there is a lot of experience and a lot of social design that comes around with it that's very broad.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to say that I will start this discussion off by saying by the end of this, I will not have said whether it is good or bad. Because I don't think that's the important part. It's understanding what it is and what makes it enjoyable and what can make it not so enjoyable for certain player types, I would say.
Yeah. I think that's if we're gonna lead with our thesis statement.
Yes.
I definitely think that's the conclusion we're going to come to tonight. After
I like letting people know where we're going.
Yeah. Is that really there's no right or wrong answer to this?
Yeah.
It depends on your table. It depends on your players. Depends on the type of story that you're trying to tell. And there absolutely is a place for micromanaging all those little bits of minutia, but you have to make sure that you've got the right players for it. You're telling that it fits with the story and
exactly,
the theme, and that everybody's having fun.
And we're not just talking about D&D. Keep that in mind. We are talking about all game systems that do this, and some do it mechanically very well.
Oh, yeah.
The
Yeah,
build
yeah.
up and the thing is that when we were talking about getting into this, one of the things you had brought up was I had made a note about layered armor, and you're like, D&D doesn't deal with layered armor.
Yeah, that's not even a thing in D&D, dude. And he's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but it is in Shadowrun.
It is.
And I was like, okay, Shadowrun.
I mean, there's a lot of other systems that deal with that. I mean, some systems have reloading mechanics, where you literally have to keep track of not only how you're reloading, but what rounds you're physically doing the act.
Oh, God, that was the moment I realized I hated GURPS.
Yeah.
Was when I was reading the combat rules, and it's like, okay, every turn is a second, and this thing takes 3 seconds to bring back around to bear.
Right.
And I'm like, so you mean to say for 3 turns, I'm reloading, that's my turn.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do that, guys.
Right. And again, that's exactly what we're talking about, is that feeling of, does that detract from the story? And we don't necessarily want to say you're using the wrong system, but maybe you're not having to use all the components of that system. And I know I don't use the components of all the systems that I play with. I sure as heck do not run D&D by the book.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And I think, I mean, I would go as far as to conjecture that if you ran any game explicitly by the book, it would get in the way of the fun. You know, I think some of the cooler moments you get in your tabletop games are when you hand wave stuff as a storyteller and say, okay, rule of cool, we're just going to do this, or for the sake of expediency, like you don't have to go through 4 more rounds of combat chopping down the 7 hit point skeletons. Like
exactly,
you've displayed through the fight, you can do it in 1 hit.
Right.
You kill all the skeletons, and we're done, and we're moving on,
Right. But when we're talking about this kind of stuff, we're talking about the minor things that are detailed and are part of the standard rule set in a lot of games. And what it really means to throw that in. And I think the word that comes around, and you brought it back up in that, is bringing things back to realism, gritty realism.
Yep.
And what it actually, I like your description of it. I've always liked your description of it.
So I was saying in our show discussion here that you can't talk about the minutia and stuff like that without talking about gritty realism, because it's really what it comes down to.
I agree.
And what it is, it's taking all the little things into account is the point of the story in a gritty realistic story. I mean, some people will say that it has like a grim, dark aspect to it, but I don't think that's necessary. I don't think the mood of the story is dictated by the term gritty realism, but it's just the idea is that every narration, every role, every rule that you use is with the idea that you are trying to represent reality as closely as possible in your gameplay,
right? In
your officiation,
right?
Typically, this means that there's going to be a lot of man versus environment encounters.
Yeah.
So basically survival.
Yeah.
Where the world itself is a foe you must conquer.
Mm-hmm.
Because we, as adventurers, especially in games like D&D, you just kind of take, hey, we're professional adventurers.
Mm-hmm.
We have things like tents and bedrolls and stuff like that. But how many of you out there have really actually gone camping in the wilderness?
Mm-hmm.
You wake up hurting the next day because you're not on a fluffy bed with a fluffy pillow. You're on the ground. There might have been sticks and rocks underneath you. You don't have adequate padding. Your tent might have been slanted. It might have rained overnight and you get some flood water. It flooded a little bit because your tent leaked.
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of awful stuff. I did a lot of camping in my youth.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's just a single night out in the wilderness. Can you imagine your characters doing this night after night after night after night on the road,
Yeah.
It takes a toll. You get wet socks, you know? There's no wet sock rule in D&D,
Mm-hmm. Likewise, if you're, constantly flying in your space fighter in your cockpit position because there is no other movement, you're not in a freighter or something, your butt is stuck like swamp butt to that seat for hours of and now you're going to go into a stressful combat situation and dive and roll around asteroids. You aren't ready for that fight. You are sore, you are cranky, you probably have to go to the bathroom.
Joking aside though, swamp butt's not your biggest concern, but usually though it's stuff like all the seemingly insignificant things that could actually kill you, like being caught in a blizzard.
Oh yeah.
Running out of ammo in the middle of an otherwise easy fight.
Yep.
It's all these little things that start coming into play in a gritty realism thing. And so a minor scuffle with thugs, if you've only got 7 bullets, now suddenly becomes complicated.
It's John Wick. You
Yeah.
know, now I've got to make a gun and find a bullet for it to kill the one
Well,
guy. You know?
maybe you've got to kill one and then confiscate his gun, and now you've got 13 bullets because he had 7 and you used 1 to kill him.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So
and that level of realism is not just dramatic, but it's stressful. It brings reality into scope, and I'm sorry, but sometimes reality is a little too much for me on a day-to-day basis, which is why I like playing a role-playing game. The last thing I want to do is be in a role-playing game wanting to play a role-playing game to get out of the realism.
Yeah, and I think that's actually very clear, like in both of our storytelling styles. Like you tend for like the very high fantasy, high adventure, very cinematic, sort of thing, and with a lot of like heroics into them and stuff like that, and I love that. I love that. But yeah, gritty realism is like the antithesis of what you try to do. I try to tell a little more grounded stories.
Yeah. But not gritty.
But not gritty. Like,
No.
absolutely not gritty. But like grounded heroics.
Yeah.
You know, not to the level of theatrics you do, but more like bread and butter theatrics. You know.
Sure. Yeah.
And so traditional heroism.
Yeah.
Maybe. But yeah, like I think that's important to keep in mind is like not everybody's a fan.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, how far do you suspend the disbelief?
Yeah.
And that's really what we're kind of framing this as, is that you can go pretty detailed. And some people go really, really detailed. I mean, I walked into a game where I had individuals who were already being realistic about playing D&D. And as a new player stepping in, I found it very kind of challenging, because now these people are talking about components, they're talking about ammo, they're talking about how much rations they have on a beginning basis of every game. Yeah. And it was like, whoa, what do you mean? Like, I should have checked my pack at the door, kind of a thing?
Right. Should I have spreadsheets for this?
Yeah. And it was harsh, but at the same time, the DM wasn't pushing it. It was just the way the players were playing the game.
Yeah.
And they were enjoying it. They were all about spreadsheets, the game. And I was just like, okay, that's great, but it wasn't necessarily for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't keep up with that level of it. It didn't ruin the moment, but it was definitely like some of the players just like, ooh, dude, I think, we don't have a chance for firewood because it's raining out right now. Can you use a spell? Well, if I use a spell slot, blah, blah, and this is before, cantrips of all.
Right.
So now you've got, ooh, do I use a spell slot to start the fire, kind of a situation, or do I use good berries because we're out of rations?
Yeah.
Kind of a situation, and it was like, ooh, shit,
Right. And I can imagine someone like you who does have a very theatric cinematic sort of taste for storytelling, you don't want to do the day-to-day grind, your whole thing is you want to escape to a fantasy realm where your problems are dragons and wizards and evil megacorps and not food and shelter and evil megacorps.
Exactly. Exactly. I like how evil megacorps are in both of those. It's true. But there's a lot of good things that you can put together in using a realistic frame, not necessarily full grit, but adding that, having a survival game where some things are a matter of surviving, that there are resources that you have to contend with, not necessarily at the same level, but like I think that Mouse Guard does a nice job of adding a blend of realism into it, where weather affects your area, and like now what may have been just a little bit of a stream is suddenly now a raging torrent, many mouse wide,
an inch deep and like a foot across,
right? Which
like
is
a raging river,
right? Which is tragic for any mouse to try and cross, but at the same time, like that's terrifying.
It is terrifying, and like I just our storyteller for our Mouse Guard game, putting in like birds,
just birds.
We were carrying a bunch of rations with us, so we had food, and the birds were like, "Hey,
food.
That smells like a bunch of seeds and berries. It's spring. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I'm a bird."
Yeah. And you look like you're bringing around food.
And they're not enemies. There's no malice there. It's just, it's just an environmental thing. It's just a reality of being on the trail as a mouse, you know?
Yeah. Exactly. So,
And I think that's probably the important takeaway is that there's degrees to it.
Mhm.
You know, like you never go full gritty realism. You know,
yeah.
and maybe you do if you
Yeah.
got the right table for it and you're telling that type of story. But maybe it's a Mad Max style story. I mean, post-apocalyptic thrives with gritty realism.
Exactly.
know?
Where literally, if you find a box of bullets, that's serious.
Mm-hmm.
You literally have a super weapon.
Oh yeah, we can go to war, guys. I found 2 clips for this submachine gun.
Right. Oh, we also find a half a canister of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Holy Lord, one of those vehicles may start with this.
4 tins of beans we are eating tonight.
Exactly. And those kind of things can change the dramatic level, can create a lot of joy, because you have set the world to have a flavor, and then that realism, that bit of gritty realism suddenly now adds a sense of enjoyment and success that wasn't there before.
Yeah, and I think that probably leads us into our next part here is that, when is it important? Where are those spots in your story where you really do want to grab for the realism? And I think that there's outside of post-apocalyptic settings. I mean, obviously post-apocalyptic settings are kind of built around this style of gameplay, but I mean, just so much more than that, even just in your regular D&D or your Shadowrun or whatever other game you're playing, there is a lot of untapped drama just existing in the world. I mean, it shows in, like, fans of, whatever your opinion of this person is, the fans of, like, Bear Grylls.
Yeah.
Man versus Wild. Movies like Mad Max and stuff like that. I mean, think about Mad Max. The hot resource in contention there was water.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
They had a source of water. And everybody wanted to kill each other over it. Boom. Whole society was built around that. And it's just a basic necessity,
It's scarcity at its finest.
Your environmental and survival complications are going to be very down to earth. And I think that's another really important thing. Like, me, like, I kind of get lost in the high concept stuff. I mentally find it hard to track. That's a me thing, not a you thing. And so I actually like survival sort of stuff like this because it's very easy for me to relate to. I understand being out of food. I understand needing shelter, needing firewood, like you said earlier. Basic resource management. Should we or should we not use a spell slot?
Yeah,
on this?
hierarchy.
Yeah, things like that. A little Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Exactly.
Literally, you remove one of those and things change.
Applied to the D&D game. And to me, it adds an element of strategy that I have to kind of plan around. I mean, it can be very difficult to describe the sheer enormity and presence of a dragon, but it doesn't really take that much to describe being so cold you can't stop shaking.
Exactly.
Because I think we've all kind of been there, at least once, or at least close,
Yeah. But at the same time, you have to be aware of the people at your table. You have to be aware of the boundaries that kind of level of stress gets to them and gets into their mind, because it gets them a little too close to their own reality.
Yeah, sure. And of course, just with everything else, I mean, literally every aspect of your story should be a conversation. And this is really no different. Obviously, getting close to gritty realism and introducing things like starvation and possibly, aspects of homelessness and things like that can hit on some points for people.
Yeah, I think anytime that you're going to be bringing in minutia and start working with things like encumbrance, stress, whether it be physical or environmental or addressing food or hunger and things like that, just like the video games do now, is that you discuss it to see if that's a setting that your players want to have in the game.
Yeah.
If it's something they're willing to accept for the style of gameplay. Because when you list out a story and you're like, okay, all of you are coming from well-fed, a decent area, but the king has asked you to go into the Badlands. This is an area that no one travels to due to the desolation and lack of water that is there. Roaming pirates, work across this wasteland, taking up anyone who attempts to travel across it, which lends to a very bleak existence. do you guys mind if we start including things like encumbrance and ammo and scarcity in the game, which may include surviving without rations and causing, endurance issues and things? And the group may not be comfortable with that.
Sure, and feel free to pitch it to them too.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a survival based story. You don't really go gallivanting around the Badlands and stuff like that. The Badlands itself is a villain you must kind of thwart. And so I think the way you thwart that is through careful resource management and stuff like that. And I'd like to tell that story. Are you in?
Yeah. And it was one of the things that I had skipped over in my D&D game, moving you guys across the desert. I made the scarcity very light.
Yeah.
I made it a presence that was there, but I never addressed it with you as a group. I never made it something that was a serious concern. It was something that you guys could handle and role play as you felt through, but other than that, it wasn't going to cause like major issues.
Sure.
Exhaustion was there, but only because you decided to push on.
You know what else was there? Sandworms.
Yes.
Because there always has to be sandworms.
It's a giant sandbox. You got to have sandworms, right?
Do you have to have sandworms, though?
I had to have sandworms.
You had to have sandworms.
I had to have sandworms.
You had to have sandworms.
I did. So let me talk about one of my experiences that I thought was really good about Minutia, because it isn't addressed like Minutia, and that is BattleTech.
Oh, yeah, okay.
BattleTech, most people don't think about it as a role-playing game. I think about it as a role-playing game because every single time I've ever sat down to play it, my brain is immediately latched into myself being inside of that cockpit and everyone else being there too, and making it very cinematic and thematic and, talking through the whole thing. It isn't just a tactical board game.
Oh, no. I'll back you on that. I mean, one of the longest campaigns I ever ran in was a BattleTech campaign.
Exactly.
We role-played the same characters, went on contracts, ran our own mercenary company.
So for me, it's always been that way. And one of the things that I think, especially the new BattleTech, really outlines well, but the previous ones did as well, was that there were levels of play. And you could adjust those levels of play pretty much as you wanted to, and add in components about Minutia. Now, one of the big things that they deal with that's a major part of play is you're using a battle mech that has armor and weapons and heat management and movement. And there are gradient levels of things that you do there that add to that minutia. Where normally it's a matter of, okay, I'm shooting this gun, which it may or may not use ammo. So do I have to track that ammo? That's up to the group if you want to do that. That's a level of minutia that you could add. And then on top of that, you could say, okay, if I get shot in a certain area, will that ammo, if I still have some there, explode? And if it does, that'll do more things. Likewise, if I fire a gun, I'm going to cause heat. If I'm running and firing that gun, is it hotter? If I'm in a certain area, meaning like we landed on a hot planet, am I managing it at a different level? Do I have to worry about shutting down or overriding my shutdowns?
Yep.
So these things add a level of stress and extra calculations to that tactical feel of that game that it already has, and at the same time adds that level of realism.
Oh, yeah.
In a relatively unrealistic world. So in that case, it still kept me from gritty realism because it wasn't, I'm trying to deal with the police coming by my house at 3 o'clock in the morning because someone shot a gun outside my house. That someone being me shooting at a raccoon, kind of a thing. But I'm in a battle mech, almost overheating. This guy is going to be firing a giant salvo of something at me, and I want to get that last shot in to stop him, kind of a thing. And that's where it did a good job as a system of layering that so that players could easily see, hey, you can enjoy the game here, or here, or here, or here. And you even had an experience beyond that.
Oh, yeah. So, like I said, one of the longest running games that I was ever in was a BattleTech campaign. We played this in high school, and ran our own mercenary company, took us on several contracts, gallivanted around the universe, got involved in the clan wars, all that jazz. Me and a couple other people actually ran the mercenary company, like, full-on did the books for the business. So on top of and we played with, like, the expert level rules where, we would land on a hot planet and it was, like, +3 heat every turn. Yes, running and shooting is hotter than just standing and shooting, etc., etc. And I ran a Banshee 3S, which ran hot already because it didn't have double heat sinks.
Right.
And I did that specifically because I loved running my mech hot, and I wanted the challenge. I wanted to see if I could keep up with the big boys with a poorly built mech, you know. But at the time, FASA had come out with a book called the Field Guide Mercenaries, and it had explicit, in-depth rules for negotiating mercenary contracts, salvage, remuneration for various costs like transportation, ammunition, and whatnot, signing bonuses and all that jazz. And you could actually go through, and they had a system basically worked out where you would bid back and forth with the person giving you the contract and work out these little details and see what it would come out to at the end of the day. Because you're not always negotiating for just money as a mercenary. You know, sometimes you want a little bit of money, but you want to be able to keep what you kill because the enemy might have fancy battle mechs, you know? So you might get a small paycheck, but you might get 3 new mechs out of it, which can range into the 12 million apiece, you know?
Nothing
20 million for
nothing
an
says
Atlas,
selling those on a market.
Sell them. Hell, keep them.
Well, depends on what you're going to do.
Sell off your old ones, keep the new ones.
That's what I say. It's still money one way or the
get
other.
Some upgrades.
Yep.
But so we really enjoyed doing that. And the main reason, I mean, nobody likes bookkeeping. You know, nobody likes playing an accountant essentially.
I'm gonna disagree on that, but we'll get to there.
But what I will say is the reason we had so much fun with it was because we found it changed the story so drastically. It changed our tactics on the battlefield so drastically. So we would do things like, we would negotiate for salvage rights.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can basically keep anything we kill on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we're not trying to total our opponents.
Right.
We're not trying to core out their reactors.
You're trying to leg somebody.
We're trying to leg them. We're trying to headshot them because a little duct tape, a lawn chair, and a joystick, and that thing is in working order again.
Just take a mop and bucket to the inside of the cockpit. We'll solve that.
Give me a garden hose. Yeah,
and that's the elementals came into a lot of play in that.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm just going to carve this guy to the cockpit because I've got a little power suit.
I'm just gonna hop up on his thing. I'm just gonna carve open his cockpit. I'm just gonna fire my little laser in there, and we're done.
Yep. And now there's no pilot.
We essentially lobotomize the mech, you know. But it changed our tactics, you know. And not only did it change the tactics on how we went out, like trying to capture our enemy in working condition, because that was less stuff we'd have to repair later. But it also changed our stuff when like we realized we didn't have a resupply, you know, and we were keeping strict track of ammo, and like our catapult is nearly out of missiles.
What are you going to do?
You're just not going to bring it.
No.
What good is a catapult that doesn't have missiles? It's going to get 3 shots and then it's going to be useless, you know?
Those bunny ears need to be loaded.
So now your artillery support suddenly isn't in the game anymore, and they need to be piloting a different battle mech. Maybe they're not as good in that battle mech.
Right.
I had one of our team had to go out in a Marauder that was missing an arm one fight.
Oh yeah.
Because we just didn't have the stuff to repair it.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have any of the salvage. We didn't have enough armor to put back on it, even if we could reattach the arm.
Mm-hmm.
The enemy was closing in on us, you know?
Yep.
Drastically changed our tactics. And all because we decided, you know, let's get a little gritty with this one.
Yep.
You know? And those stories never would have been told if we'd have just been like, okay, we're just going to throw down a mat and throw down some battle mechs and fight.
Yeah, and it completely changes the feel. And that's kind of where we're focusing on here, is that these systems, these edges that throw in a little bit more should always be something that adds to the enjoyment.
Yeah.
I mean, if your players don't enjoy that combat now takes longer, or tactically it takes longer to get set up for something, and they're literally getting disconnected from the game, then it's not adding to it.
Yeah.
It's detaching. Now, I will say, there is nothing to say that single players, and this is kind of where I was coming back here, like no one likes to keep spreadsheets. I was in a game where one of the players was the gearmonger, and they freaking loved it.
Sure.
And you watched them pore over every little detail of what spell components came out. Like, literally, they were... I got a very clear image when I played that game with them that they were like the the ferret kind of character who was sitting there rifling through bags and speaking in a little tongue, and being like, oh, this is lovely, I shall put this over here, and and going through everything until they had everything broken out to a perfect level so that they knew exactly where everything was and how it was going to assist everyone. And they knew what they had at all times. This is a person who, if they had a bag of holding, would always know every item that was in it to be able to retrieve it at a moment's notice.
Mm-hmm.
They may not be there for the tactics of the game. They may not be there for the combat of the game. They may not be there for the socialism of the game. They throw those elements in, but the player, not even the character, the player loved the minutia. And it was neat to watch the DM literally have a side game going with them, almost. Where, like, the game was rolling, they were throwing in their kibits, they were doing their things, but when it came down to loot, they knew exactly what that player wanted and worked with them. And it was wonderful. Now, from an external perspective, going back to those days, I'm like, I understand what that person was doing. He was giving them the game that player wanted.
Exactly, and that's what I was just about to touch on was the whole the fact that he was just giving them the game they were looking for.
Exactly.
And really, any storyteller should be doing that.
Yep.
Know what your players like and cater your story to them.
But I think,
especially when you're narrating just to them.
Correct. Correct. I mean, you do the personal character narration very well, where you describe something to the Norse, about how cold it is, and you explain that it's balmy, and that you might want to, shrug.
That the rest of you feel a chill run down your spine as goose flesh ripples over your exposed arms, and your nose begins to just tingle a little bit at the beginnings of the frost nipping at it. Rhaegar, it's a little chilly in here.
Yeah, it's balmy. The humidity is a little high.
This is whether you might consider putting on a long sleeve shirt.
Yeah, you'll want to brush your beard later.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. And it's those kinds of things that also lend themselves to it. I think one of the things that Knox brings up very interestingly, which I think we both struggle with trying to describe, is how do you handle that as a storyteller who likes the minutia to players who don't?
Yeah.
And I can honestly say I can try and come up with some good help there and ideas, but honestly, it's a struggle in my mind. And I would say still, just like the storytellers who like telling darker tales, or who like going for more of the sneaky, backstabby worlds where almost every person that you talk to is a semi-gray character who's just in it for the money or power or something.
Sure.
Those kind of things. Sometimes you have to scale those stories differently for the players and change a little bit of the flavor, give them a light in the darkness so that they feel safe a little bit, and or find the right group to play to. Because there are literally an unlimited number of players out there who are willing to play games, and there is bound to be a group that will enjoy the style of story you're going to tell.
Yeah.
The trick is displaying it in a way that those people suddenly go, I really wasn't thinking about fantasy, but this guy just brought up the concept of they're including encumbrance and gear and ammo, and really this is a game about scarcity. I want to play this. Why? I don't know, but there's part of me that really wants to know if I can make it across that desert.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, now you have players who are very interested in making it across the desert that doesn't have giant worms, that just has sand dunes and a whole lack of water.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the best times I've ever had playing Skyrim. I think I've told this story on the show before. Is when I installed a mod called Frostfall, which takes temperature and dampness into account. So if you go into a river, you are considered wet.
Yeah,
and that changes how your character handles heat entirely.
Yeah.
You can die of hypothermia with this mod in there. And then I also included realistic needs, which makes you need food, water, and sleep. And of course, all those things will start slowly affecting your health and stamina regeneration, and then kill you afterwards if you don't tend to them.
Right.
And one of the best times I've ever had, you can do all sorts of stuff to become overpowered in Skyrim. With enchanting and alchemy and whatnot, you can make bows that one-shot dragons, and stuff. And with these mods in there, though, I wasn't afraid of the dragons. I wasn't afraid of the wolves or the trolls or the bandits that I would run across. I nearly died trying to walk from Winterhold to Windhelm.
Yeah, in our environmental storytelling, you retold that tale, and just the idea of that it wasn't part of it wasn't part of the actual plot or even random NPCs that was killing you. It was literally just surviving.
I just made the rule that I wasn't going to fast travel and that I was going to play according to the world, and the world nearly killed me.
Yeah.
And I stumbled sopping wet because I missed a jump and landed in the bay, right at the docks in Windhelm. Like I was in the home stretch, already just bone chilled cold. The vision was blurring. My stamina just straight up wasn't regenerating anymore. And then I missed a jump and I landed in the water, and like instant hypothermia.
Yep.
And I remember finally finding a large enough fire I could warm myself by.
Yep.
And just the victory, the absolute victory. I hadn't gotten a new treasure. I hadn't conquered a dungeon, uncovered a hidden secret, hadn't slain a dragon, hadn't advanced the plot at all. No, I walked from one town to another, and I made it.
Yep. Yep. I think to step off of this a little bit, Overwatch has an interesting point because we were just talking in chat about the minutia and bringing it around and what's good. And he said, I use descriptive language to hook them into minutia. If they ignoring it, but it's still in the campaign, and that is, after combat, you check and reload all your weapons. You've got a handful of spare magazines left, but another fight, and you'll be fighting them with knives.
Ooh. That's a good way of it's almost like a warning shot at that point. It's almost like saying, okay, you ignored it last fight, and that's fine, because you had the resources to be able to ignore it, but I've noted that resources are getting thin, and I'm letting you know that.
Yeah, and I think...
It's a nice way of doing it.
I think that's another thing that D&D kind of does well when you don't give them the option for a short rest. Because that changes all kinds of player gameplay and makes it more gritty. Even that simple thing, even if you're not playing with the other stuff, that right there terrifies people.
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's just something that happened recently in Critical Role. The big bad guys paid them a visit like 6 hours into their 8-hour-long rest, and just didn't ambush them, didn't even fight them. They were just woke them up and disturbed them enough that they couldn't get enough sleep through the night.
Yep.
So none of them got their spell slots back.
Yep.
And then the big bad guy was just there, and he was like, we're going to hang out for a while until I figure out what you guys are up to. And they were making all sorts of plans. You could see their minds racing, and they were panicking because here's the big bad guy, and they don't have any spell slots.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's one of the things that I started to look into is where people were doing this, and one of the things that was a glaring thing was just telling the players, like, oh, you're entering the town and there's a festival going on. So you go to stay, you try and find an inn, and eventually you do find one. It's kind of near the center of town. It's right in the heart of the entire festival. Really nice place generally. So during the day, it's lively outside. There's all kinds of stuff you can find. There's vendors and stuff. It's great. And they're like, great, so we're going to go do our stuff. We're going to come back. So they come back to the town. They're like, yep, town is still partying. The festival is still going on. Great, we're going to go get some sleep. You can't get a full night's sleep.
Yeah.
The best you can do is a short rest.
Everybody give me a wisdom saving throw.
Yeah.
Just to see if you can tune it out.
They're like, well, I don't sleep. I only need to meditate. You can't. You can't even reach your elven meditation.
Every time you start getting into that zone, fireworks start going off.
Yeah, there's this really catchy tune outside.
Drunk sorority girls start singing
exactly.
Sweet Carol.
Yeah, and literally you're bopping your head while doing your elven meditation.
You're trying to meditate, and you're like, bop, bop. Oh, damn it.
Yeah, exactly. and I was just like, oh, and it was subtle.
Yeah.
Like, the players didn't recognize that that's what they did, but they were like, oh no, this is going to ruin everything.
We camped in downtown Vegas. Oh god, guys.
Exactly. Like, great town, great stuff to go there. Don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Like, can we move out of town tonight? There's no place to move out of town.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna go out of town an hour off the road and set up a campsite just so you can get 8 hours of sleep. It'll be midday by the time we gotta go. Oh no.
Mm-hmm.
But they were able to get like a short rest and literally leave town as quickly as possible.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's absolutely awesome.
We have some good questions.
Yeah,
I kind of want to hit these.
Got some really good questions. So let's go ahead and get
Pick
into
one.
those here. I'm just gonna start right at the top.
Okay.
So Knox in the Box tossed one at us. It seems like every time I want to wrap a project up, the minutia of the finishing touches always clashes with either my time or my drive. As far as storytelling goes, should you always cover your bases, Or do you think it's actually beneficial to leave the minutia vague and let the players project upon it? Could this go wrong or be less fun?
So for me, I kind of find that it's more of a drive of details than making, and as you get into diving in those details, you end up kind of writing a novel instead of playing a role-playing game.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of my players discovering things and finding it. So as they find something that they're interested in, they're going to go down that route. Now,
Yes.
I'm going to have some short notes to start that. So it's basically going to be like 1 or 2 lines, but I'm not going to have every single NPC motivations and directions flushed out. I know what my big bad guy would relatively do. And I say relatively do because I basically have 2 lines that describe my big bad guy and their general plan. I don't say when it's going to happen. I don't say how it's going to happen beyond that because I want my players to come up with where they're going and how that's going to affect it in the end.
Sure, and you want to be able to leave landmines of drama in front of them to tell the story.
And then I can throw in wherever I want the pieces of detail that I
Yes.
find most important that they need to know about. So for me, I would say, yes, I leave the minutia quite vague until it becomes something that they're interested in. If my players come up with the idea that, I basically let them know, like, hey, you guys know that the big bad evil guys got their army getting ready to take on the castle. Like, well, we got to get around that because we've got to get to the other side and take out that commander to be able to stop that war from happening. Okay, well, I mean, you guys could sneak through the battlefield, could we take the mountain pass or something to go around it? You could. So now my brain goes to, we now have a survival game. So I can just quickly shift gears and go into the minutia of them trying to survive getting through the mountain pass.
Yeah.
And pulling the Lord of the Rings like we should have gone through the Mines of Moria instead.
Yep.
Kind of moment. But at the same time,
Called it a mine.
but that's for me to be on the lighter side of. I never want to have the entire minutia done. I always want to give them that option.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. I think if you want to impress your own details on people and tell the story that you want to tell, you should just write a novel.
Yeah.
Leave the details vague and just let the players tell you what value they found in it.
Yeah.
If a player glomps onto an NPC, then tell a story about that NPC. Clearly, they like that NPC and they want to know more.
Yeah.
Give them what they want.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you've got a bigger story that you're trying to drive for. I'm not saying abandon all of your notes the moment they take a shine to the shopkeeper or something like that. But within reason. If one player, like you discussed earlier, that the aspects of the story they like are the little minutia, maybe focus on those little minutia, the little survival aspects and stuff like that. Not enough that it bogs the entire group down, but enough that it allows that player to feel involved and have that one thing that they like.
Yeah. One of the things that just triggered in my mind was someone saying that if you're someone who tends to write novel-based RPGs where you have a complete story from beginning to end, like what you want your players to follow, write it. Like write the whole timeline, write the whole thing, and put a protagonist in it. Make somebody up. Make a knight, make somebody who's going to do that, right, from beginning to end. Then put them in your game and let your players figure out where they fit in around it. They may go somewhere else. Keep that story going. Focus in your mind that story is continuing. That protagonist is doing those things. Your players are in the same world. There's nothing to say that they can't affect it.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say they're not going to run back across that protagonist who is now no longer a lieutenant, who is now a captain, who's found these things out and is telling it to them, and may need their help to go find this other artifact while they go take care of a problem. Like, now you have a story.
Yeah.
You've got a direction with minutia and detail, and that big bad guy is not focused on your players, but on him. And it was like, okay, that's a great idea. So what do? You have him die. You have him fail.
And then these players who have been walking in his footsteps the entire time now feel invested and go, we gotta finish what he started.
We know what's going on here.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. And you make a decision. But that's a good way to twist your own mind as a storyteller and say, you can tell complex stories. Just let your players run alongside of them.
Here's something one of our Patreon's veteran will appreciate. Knox puts in the live chat, excuse me, we need to send this little NPC to college again.
Yes, yes. Actually, both Veteran and Sibek
Oh yeah.
both know that storyline. I think sometimes I wish we need to open up a Discord and force people to tell those stories. Like,
Yes.
you are forced to tell this story here.
Agreed. Just sit them down and just be like, look,
You have to tell us now.
you cannot leave. You cannot have hot pretzels until you tell the story.
That's right.
So
Because
keep typing.
people need to know these stories.
Exactly.
Because I think that's important. All right, let's get another question.
All right,
before we
so
get too far off.
Patreon Hulavu asks, can you give us some ideas for balancing the table when one or more players is focused on the story and wants to ignore the minutia, and other players are focused on the gameplay and are very interested in all the minutia?
So like I was saying, I was in a group where they were totally focused on gear and components and followers, and one of the fighters actually picked up a small militia of followers. And the DN ran it just like it was fine for everybody, but they had literally one player who was looking at all of the details and kept track of those details. And it was interesting that I look back on it now almost like the way like you would explain to the thief of the group the intricacies of the lock.
Sure.
And it's their own little game. Or like if you're in Shadowrun, playing the net attacks and things like that to your decker or your hacker, so that it is their own little game within the game. They're playing the mini game, D&D the mini game, if you will, to get those pieces out of it. But to see the joy that person was pulling out of it. They had their stresses, they had their drama, they were concerned about things just as much as the other players.
Yeah.
In fight situations. So there's totally ways to do side stories there.
I agree, and but I think, at least for me, when you got kind of a mixed group like that, it's important to focus on what the majority of your players want, typically. But I would tend to opt for focusing on the story versus focusing on the minutia, because I find it's easy to add minutia, but it's very difficult to pull it back out again once you've made it the focus. Like,
right.
You don't get to like start with, okay, everybody, we're using encumbrance rules and we're using strict ammo counts and keep track of your gold down to the very copper piece, and then 3 games later start hand waving stuff and just say, oh, it's cool, it's fine.
Right.
Because your players are going to be like, wait, hold on, we're getting kind of whiplash here. Is it fine or is it not?
Exactly. Say, if you set a rule, you should stick by your rule, because otherwise people are going to question whether your rules mean anything.
Right. So I think it's
you are the game master. Play by your own rules.
Exactly. And it's we've said it before. It's about offering a consistent experience. So I think it's easier to offer that consistent experience when you are starting light and then adding heavier elements, and you can add those heavy elements selectively, like you said earlier, where you've got that one player who wants to handle the minutia, so the storyteller just tells their general story, and then when he's narrating to that character, he says, okay, you've got 50 of these, 25 of these, 30 of these, and 7 of those.
Yep.
All right, awesome, I'm putting them in the spreadsheet. Cool, you're handled for a little bit and you're smiling. I'm gonna tell the rest of the story now,
Yep.
But ultimately it comes down to communication at your table. Tell them why. Tell them why you are handling things a certain way. For example, like, I want to keep the story lighter and faster for the benefit of the table and not get bogged down in the little stuff. We can just say you have enough ammo or food or water or whatever else is being micromanaged. And I've said this before to you guys when you've asked about minutia in my game, and that is, you're all experienced adventurers, and I assume that you just have the stuff that you're specifying.
Right.
You would not have left without enough rations.
Well, and the other thing is that there are times when you can add concern, like Chris did, where you're adding a level of things. So, for instance, if you're talking about a scene where your players are thrown overboard and they don't have their gear, that's not getting into minutia. That's setting a tone for a scene. If your players are, in a cell, and you can say you don't have your weapons and armor, great. You're not getting into minutia, but you're playing up the drama of the moment. And I think that's where you can be a little more flexible with certain aspects of it, because you're letting the narrative speak to the feel in the scene, and then when they get their gear, they have their gear.
Yep.
Just make sure that you're not piecemealing them along the way and making them work through the minutia.
Yep, absolutely.
Unless you intend to continue it from that point forward.
Right.
So.
All right. So Overwatch asks,
Yep.
what single example of minutia tracking do you think has a high effect on the feel of a given game setting or session? Is this something that could be utilized for dramatic effect in your storytelling kit?
I'm gonna quickly just put out the fact that BattleTech does a good job of that. I think as a system, it helps you build drama and stress through its mechanics and the build of those mechanics.
Oh, absolutely.
And that
absolutely.
the minutia within that helps that. I think that Shadowrun does that as well. That the more minutia you put into it, the more you get out of it. And it creates its own sense of tension that then you don't have to add other elements in the game. Your players are focused on those simple elements of survival and, trying to figure out where their next meal or protection or ammo or whatever is coming from. I'm sorry, you guys lost your firearms because they got taken from you going through the checkpoint. And now you're being gunned down by a group on the other side of the checkpoint who are waiting for you to lose your weapons. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. And your player pulls off a boot and throws, the troll pulls off his boot and throws it at a guy because it's literally a 15-pound boot. And he's a troll, and it can knock somebody the hell out, which it did.
Right.
So, legitimate story scene that happened on the way into an elven forest. We
was just going to say, that sounds oddly specific.
It was exceptionally specific. Overwatch tells the story much better than I do, but it was an incredible scene and worked out really well and made my squishy Decker very squishy.
Yeah.
Because I was not ready for that. But at the same time, those are the kinds of moments that you can layer into games when you have minutia control. Mm-hmm. And you have an understanding with your players the level of minutia that you're dealing with. I think that 7th Sea does a good job of that at least in my games, where I'm just you're not, unless you master reloading, you're not getting off another shot on your pistol in this fight. Mm-hmm. You're firing and forgetting.
Yeah. That was actually going to be my answer to this question, is that my personal one, if I could choose one bit of minutia to track in a gritty realism sense, it's always going to be ammo. Because I think so often we go with that John Woo style of limitless ammo gameplay.
Yes.
And I think that and this is going to be a very D&D centric answer, I think.
Sure.
But I mean, it's primarily what I play. But I think that cheapens the game for players of spellcasters or other limited use, limited resource characters. The spellcasters will have to worry about their spell slots, but yet you're offering unlimited ammunition essentially to the ranger,
right,
who can put out just as much, if not more, consistent damage than you can.
Right.
And so I think keeping track of ammunition like that is super valuable, because it makes every shot feel like it counts all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
And losing a crossbow bolt doesn't feel like a tactical decision when you've got a quiver full of them, but it sure as heck feels very tactical when you're down to your last two.
Right.
And you're I don't know, what do I do from here?
The Hawkeye moment.
Yeah, you start having that moment of okay, can I start picking some up off of dead enemies? The nearest dead enemy to me is 10 feet away, but that means I've got to make a move next turn. It might even be an action to pick up another crossbow bolt. So then I'm not, you start making tactical decisions off of that.
Right.
Now, the other thing, too, is it makes special ammunition feel less fiddly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you might have a few, special or magical arrows, or, if you're playing a high-tech game, you might have some, hollow points or armor piercing or, various other rounds. If you're already keeping track of ammo, it doesn't feel like a non sequitur to keep track of your special ammo.
No, it fits right in.
Right.
So now you're okay, so I have, armor piercing rounds in this clip.
3 clips of regular ammo.
Yeah.
1 clip of hollow points.
Yeah.
1 clip of armor piercing.
Right.
And now suddenly it all feels
right,
consistent across the board.
Yeah, I liked when you would your character would have their 3-clip belt, and the question was, what do you start with? What ammo do you clip in first?
Uh-huh.
And the answer is, well, I clip in my cheapest, which is my gel rounds, because the initial guys that I'm going to be spraying down, I just want to put them down. I don't need to kill them. I just need them out of the way, and that's going to do care. And then you get into the fight, and the first thing that you have to do is literally rip out that clip and throw in your armor piercing, because it's heavy guys who are at the front door, and they are not going down from gel rounds.
Yep. and again, that's a tactical decision of this is going to be 2 rounds of me pulling out the old ammo, putting in the new ammo, cover me.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because I'm the heavy gunner. Like,
Yeah.
I need 2 rounds.
Right.
You guys just live 2 rounds, and I'll win the fight for us.
Or mixing your 2 guns that you have. So
Yeah,
you've got
yeah.
one with one and one with the other, and now you've got to determine yourself, how are you going to spray?
Yep.
What gun are you going to shoot with?
Yep.
So, yeah. One other question that came up that was from, I think Knox was, and it's a little off, but I think off of this topic, but I still think it's a good question for tonight. Was though I don't know the details, I heard that Dread has a number of questions to make players think about the shape their character's backstory and personality. I don't know Dread, you do, but I get the feeling here. Are there any other systems with unique questions or concepts that you feel inspire players during character creation? Totally. There's 7C did a literally has a character build that uses a questions type system. Now they used literally a tarot style draw to build your character, which would create backgrounds and everything else in it as well. So you could completely build your character concept off of that and work from it. I think that the standard 20 questions is a great way to go, although that now has expanded heavily and moved across multiple systems and been embedded in them as a mainstay. City of Mist's characters are 100% built off of who are you?
Oh, yeah.
Your power sets, everything is a question and a statement. How does your power manifest under stress?
Yeah, and that's...
It's literally a question for how to build your character.
I think what I said was City of Mist felt like Powered by the Apocalypse and Fate got together and had a baby.
Yeah, very much
so. And that baby was City of Mist, because my answer was Fate. Does all of that with the character bonds during character creation, and in fact, you tell little stories about how your characters met and adventures they've had together.
Yeah,
and those become aspects on your character sheet. You would literally get attributes, I suppose, off of them,
or bonuses or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, aspects are really difficult to define as to exactly what they are. I suppose they're kind of abilities, but not really. But they're part of your character. Like, they become a functional thing you use during gameplay.
Yes.
So it's not even just building your backstory, but you gained an experience from that.
Right, and
you learned a lesson, and that experience can be used in-game.
Correct, and that's what I think is really interesting. And then Dungeon World was the other one that I wanted to talk about, where it was dealing with bonds.
Yeah.
I loved the bond system. When Dungeon World was one of those first steps of like, oh, that's a neat way of handling opening character bonds. Like, how did you meet? How do you know each other? What does this person... Why do you respect this person? And what secret do you know about this person that you keep between the two of you?
What is the thing that this person does that you're going to one day give them their comeuppance for?
Yeah. Why do you owe this person a favor? Oh, shoot. And so now you've got these questions that are not only giving you a bond between the other player, but creates a history. Yeah. Something to talk about.
Yep.
And I love that kind of stuff. I think... that needs to be in itself a large part of the game, but that also speaks to those systems and what those systems are trying to do for creating characters versus just having a character in the world.
Yeah.
So
one other system I know of that I want to mention real quick, but I don't know a lot about it. We do have a system spotlight coming up for
which one?
Traveler.
Yes, we do actually have that one coming up.
We've got it on the schedule. It may be a month or two.
It's next month.
It is next month.
I think it is next month.
But the character creation system is basically a career path thing, and it kind of goes in like 4-year segments of your life, and you can just keep adding them. And they add more skills, they add more life experiences and whatnot.
Yeah.
But you can actually outright die during character creation.
It definitely is a thing. So, but actually, it's not next month. It will be, I think, the following month. I think we're looking at April for that, or April, May.
All right, but we are wrapping up, though. Our next week's topic is going to be dark fantasy campaign settings. How to have a little light in the grim darkness. So you can find us on Twitter at @ST_conclave, on Instagram at @ST_conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern at mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us on our Discord. You can find the link up on our Twitter, as well as our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members, Nox, Sam, the Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, and Vedran, as well as the rest of you. Thank you so much for helping us every week. It makes this show happen, and we always encourage you to join us there, where you can join us in our live chat and chat with us while we're doing this Mixlr. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. You can find that at guyfrogmusic.weebly.com. And our outro music, which you're hearing now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at soundcloud.com/midairmachine/tracks.
As always, a big shout out to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for supporting us. We love you very much. All of our friends who've sat with us at our tables over the years to give us these great stories to share with you. And all of you, our listeners. We love you so much.
Love you.
Good night.
Good night.